Hello. It's been a couple days since I have peacefully sat down and done a live video. I've been doing them kind of in mid-step, I guess you could say. Um, so I have decided to do one today that is a little bit more relaxed and without a core like I want to talk about this, I want to do this. So I am sitting in my living room. The ceiling looks terrible. It is like forever needs to be repainted. But in all reality, yeah, I guess it is repaint. I'm like, I hate the popcorn ceiling, but it at this point needs to be repainted. So instead of me being like, oh, I wish I could just take the popcorn ceiling down, but so I have been thinking a good bit today on communication, and which happens to be what I'm getting my degree in. So it is a super important topic to me, and I also am dealing with right now in my life. My earrings bothering me. I'm dealing with some family members who are having problems with dementia, and with dementia comes difficulty in communication, and just as a broad subject. So it has been a lifelong, super important topic to me, because I have a difference in communication, and people are always nice, of course, to people they perceive with a disability like I have, but like, because in conversation and in knowing me, like, you can tell that there is a difference with me in communicating and stuff. Definitely not a lack, but a difference. I am a very visual person, actually, but for many for most of my life, it things that I didn't spend a lot of time talking about things like that, because it was something that was really emotionally difficult for me to bring up, because I didn't, my vocabulary, just like in the middle of still trying to understand where the breakdown was, in the middle of studying, and for the sake of this conversation, for being in the middle of field work, it isn't something that I wanted to turn around and be like, lecture my emotions about, because it, is the very core of my being, because very early on, I realized that, if you don't, do yourself, like, often enough people won't reach back out to you and stuff. And that is like, has been a really difficult thing for me, just, as old as I am, in the past 5 years, like, the fact that, you know, people aren't, like, nobody cares, and I was taught that, that's what trauma teaches. That's what abuse teaches, and like, I know how much I care. I know that isn't true, and I also know that just because, you know, like, care goes up and down, like, just because attention is, wavers and goes in different directions doesn't mean that care isn't there. um but the thing is that the disability that I have is not is very rare. Like, people don't know about it. They don't know that, like, people can have different um you know blindnesses to senses and stuff that can leave you, in bondage. Like, people don't understand that. um so, and I, have many times in my life dealt with disassociation and as a disorder, because, I really didn't want that to be true. I also didn't have a word for it. Like, I didn't have the information to, and, know exactly, like, how it worked and stuff. I just knew myself. And so it is, um you know it's a really difficult subject for me. You know like I said, dealing with so much um data and information, to how, opposite the world can be and people are for me, um at times in my life, has been really traumatic. um I definitely at times have pretended, taken too much on. Um, you know, I have not moved out of the way when you know, somebody was being super mean to me and stuff like that. I wanted to pretend that, you know, I could deal with stuff that I absolutely cannot, And then, I had to learn about, like, it's like, what can people in general actually deal with? Is it just me, or is it other people too? You know, so, and like, what kind of, I learned very much, like, and studied, um, what do people need in order to, not only survive, on that level, but also to flourish as people, and to be healthy. There's, I always saw growing up, how, as lots of people do, um, what others have, in comparison to what you have. And so, I may have had friends who were like, oh, like, I don't have good parents, and I notice my friends have good parents. We don't have a lot of money, I notice my friends have money. I don't have nice clothes, or, really, good food, and I notice my friends have that. for me, I used to pray when I was a child that, I wish I had a normal family. Um, at 40 years old, that prayer, is still a prayer. Like, I have never achieved that. I have never, in fact, I am more alone now than I was as a child. Um, I do not have the abuse around me that I had when I was a child. Um, but for me, I noticed that, I was like, I wish that, I notice, the peace that other people have within themselves and the freedom to move, and through life and to do as they please, and the warmth and the friendships that they have, the ease of the warmth and the friendships that they have around them. And I have never had that. I have always had to literally fight everybody. Um, you know, so not only with family, but with friends, and it wasn't just a matter of like, there was people that were like that I've known the entire time I've known them. And then there's people like that, it took years for them, they would talk about me behind my back. And then, years later, then they finally started, being like that to my face. So, like, where they're like, I don't even know who that is, after living with me for years, so, same thing as the people who fought me, at the end of the day, is like they were this exact same as people who, fought me to my face constantly. And it's like, no, you're wrong, like in every step of the way. So, and it's one of those things that's like, when you've got so much going on as I did, it's like I couldn't exactly just walk away from the situations, so immediately, it is painful. It is very painful, knowing stuff and being, so knowledgeable and wise about stuff like that, my entire life. And the thing is like, knowing that it's like this information is not going to change, and like I said, at this day, on today, like this information is still as valid. Those, nothing like those people are, still that way, like, not still that way, but like, that's still, I still, and the person that had to be like, no, that's not how life works, it's definitely not fun being young and having to tell people who are 20, 30, sometimes even 40 years older, people close and people you don't know, that like, no, life doesn't work like that. Like, that isn't how, like, you will learn that one day, being young and having to explain that to people. Um, and so, like, the older I've gotten, that information, of course, like I've just stated a couple times, is still very valid. And how does that information, evolve? Like, and one of the things is that, after a certain point, like, I don't know if you've ever, been in a situation where you're like, I don't know how much more I can take. Like, where is this going to go? Where do you go after a master level? Well, I figured out, it's like, where do you go, once you hit the master level? You go into the arts. It becomes a, a 2D situation becomes a 3D situation. So, and that information is valid across different levels, so there's the whole, like, I started having seizures, but then also, like, I started being able to communicate the information, but then also I started to be able to comprehend all that same information in a visual landscape, is, I guess, the best way you can describe it. And I started seeing information around me, that was computing, and justifying, I guess you could say, that knowledge, or that was not knowledge, but that wisdom, that I just expressed, and or alluding to, symbolically and stuff. It's not something that I think about, like, on a day-to-day basis, but, like, I noticed that kind of stuff around me, to where when I was younger, information that was super important to me, I would notice more in a gut way, like if there was, as we all do. So now it's like, I get epiphanies as I'm going to sleep, where information will just, like, pop up, that has to do with, like, say an equation is being done, and, like, so the answer to it will just pop up in my mind as I'm going to sleep, and that is, the definition of, like, an epiphany. So, I'm going to smoke a cigarette. It's not something, this topic isn't something that I sit around and think about, any more than somebody who is black, sits around and thinks about racism and stuff, like some people do. Some people have, like, gone to college and majored in stuff like that, and will definitely spend periods of time, very heavily immersed in their own, in something that is emotionally sensitive topic to them, in their family and, like, stuff like that, but it isn't something that, for most everybody, like, it's, subjects that are emotionally sensitive to you are not something that, like, the human experience is kind of prone to disengage from things that are emotionally heavy, or things that kind of, like, poke at you and stuff. And I see that, like, like, I notice that, like, when I'm talking to people, or when I'm communicating with others, how sometimes, like, it's neither here nor there, but I do notice, like how people tend to avoid, like, emotional triggers and stuff, like, that's a common knowledge. I think it's a really wise thing for people to be aware of that, like, what emotionally triggers them, and, like, to be able to deal with things that emotionally trigger them, and also to communicate it to people that is important to them. And not just important to them, but people that, like, because, like, whether you find your boss important to you or your coworker, it's neither here nor there, because at the end of the day, like, the fact that you work together is what decides on whether or not they're important to you. So if you're working with somebody, then you need to, communicate with them. Whether you want to or not, whether you actually personally think it's important or not, like you have to, or your job fails. So a lot of people don't realize that. A lot of people don't take their, relationships and their friendships very seriously. A lot of people are in their emotions about stuff like that, just, out and about. And, for whatever reason, whatever's going on in their life, don't do a very good job with that. Like, that is a really common thing in today's age, and you can get on about any popular Facebook page or group and see that in action. Where people aren't actually talking to each other, they're just commenting. They're not commenting on each other's stuff. It's a soundboard for people to give their, to let, it's a ping, for people to, like, let other people know where they're at. They're not actually doing the work of communicating. They're, you have an outburst, for the sake of conversation. Like, that is what Facebook is. And it's thousands and thousands and thousands and, millions, here we go, millions and millions of comments a day all over just Facebook where people are having outbursts. There's not actual real dialogue going back and forth. There is a lot, of course, but at the same time, there is not. There is definitely more not than there is actual conversation. So, for someone like me who is really aware of that, it's hard for me to engage with it. Like, I get it, it's a part of human nature to be able to express that. But like I said, in reality, artistic expression comes at the end of mastering, a level of experience in life. So, like, people are actually just creating over and over and over again as the same as they are spitting. And you can definitely, look at some, interact with it and stuff, people's random thoughts and whatnot. But, they are as changing and fleeting, as, a grain of sand on the beach, so, needless to say, I value communication a whole lot. I am, very much lacking in my relationships. I'm definitely having a hard time. I'm still grieving, a lot of relationships and stuff. I am also having a hard time figuring out how to build, new relationships, because I miss my old ones. I miss, people that feel familiar to me. Not only do I miss people that are familiar to me, but I miss, relationships that do feel familiar to me. And it is often the case with me where people start, somebody that is extremely important to me will, start to, build a relationship with me and then disappear. And that is always super, 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 super painful for me. Life does not stop. Like, it does not matter that, I was having seizures. Even in that, people still are like, start to build relationships, and, we're not there, like, would come and go at their own leisure. Like, you can't help but meet people who have communication problems even when you're not completely well yourself, because life doesn't stop. So that is really hurtful. I don't have abandonment issues, but, my family members, all of them, have always come in and out of my life my entire life. I know that, I have a personal relationship with God, and I know that they are still there. But it gets really heavy. I live alone. I take care of my, home and my property and my responsibilities myself. I have been living this way since I was 18 years old. I have had my own home, since I was 18 years old. I knew nobody. I still don't know anybody who, was also in that situation. So, I didn't have all the responsibilities, when I was younger, of taking care of everything in the property. I had help with it and stuff, but I also had just come from a situation where that's what I had to do that as a teenager. Like, I had to, do yard work. I had to, clean and take care of the property and stuff. When I lived at my dad's house, where my mom wasn't like that. My mom took care of everything, and my stepdad, it wasn't my responsibility. When I was little, and then I had a grandmother who told me that it was opposite, that, my dad did not do that, and that my mother didn't do anything. And, like, my mother takes care, not only did my mother, take care of her own property, do all the yard work, all the land work, and take care of the house, but she also has to take care of another person who can't walk, or feed themselves, who lives at home. They go to an adult daycare, but she had to, and still does, like, my sister's almost 50. She does that herself, and also raise 2 other children, and also, go through several marriages, with people who, like, like I just explained, like, people not being able to meet, that whole, like, reality at the end of the day. So it is, it's a hard subject. It's, without me even saying anything, it my energy does ask other people to step up a level, and so I get a lot of interference from people that I don't even know. So, like, like, I do definitely have a harder time, in life than anybody else while I'm out by myself. And it has been very far and few between that I have ever met anybody, that steps up to the plate to be there for me, to support me in all that. Like, it is a very worthy thing. I have definitely taken it upon myself to raise, other people's children. It is the same type of thing. Like, when you see that there's a need, that somebody needs your help, and, like, do you do it? Like, how, and I'm not talking about dating somebody and, literally, like, taking it upon yourself to parent another, person's child, but like literally when something is put in your lap, do you ignore it? And when I say put into your lap, I mean like when you've made a decision that you feel a certain way, and usually you don't make that decision, it's just part of who you are. But when you realize that it's in your lap, do you step forward and acknowledge it, or do you back away and ignore it, get rid of it? Do you hide? Do you shun the knowledge that you have just gained? Those all important topics when you look on the stuff. We've had a couple incidents in the news recently on, where people have sat and watched, really brutal stuff happen to innocent people. And as, is always the case and stuff, but there was a couple things in the past couple months where it was like exactly that. There isn't any like, oh, that person had it coming or anything like that. Like they were literally just sitting there. And so like sometimes, I, as a normal person, will meet somebody and like, okay, so when I was younger, I was much more, I wasn't meaner. I mean, I kind of was meaner, but like, I was much more, the whole breakdown level between like my expectations and what was normal for other people was not ironed out, very clearly. I, was still like people, talk about like, being like, I don't know the appropriate way to explain this, but just something like as simple as like hopeless romantic, and it's like being broken out of something like that. It's kind of like that, but not. What it is that I had to learn that, often people, okay, like there's a quote that is like, people can only meet you as far as they've met themselves. And that is really, really important for me to know and to remember. I don't have to remember it anymore. I just know that. It has caused me a great deal of peace learning that. It given me a great deal of intelligence learning that. It has given me a great deal of healing learning that. Not only do I not have the same expectations for others, but I can actively work with other people a lot better and a lot more clearly and a lot more empathetically than I could when I was younger. I was still very much like, being told this is how things should be and stuff, like when I was younger, and still wasn't. And then also I was just younger, so I didn't have the experience of knowing exactly like, how far time goes. The learning experience, like exactly like child development. So that was something that was really important for me, is like, being familiarized with like child development and how people grow empathetically and what affects that and what doesn't, and then the experience of people throughout their 20s and 30s, and then also looking at geriatric and how health affects stuff, how poverty, stress, all that kind of stuff affects like people and their empathy levels, and all that goes, goes into, is covered under the subject of communications. So it is something that I have, like, is really important to me at my core. It's not something that's easy, and that's why it's something also that is really interesting, and is valuable, because it's not something that is just white and black. And once I learned that, it was, I was like, that's super, super interesting. And like I said, it caused me to have a great deal more empathy. Most people like know that, like, But for me, I had to really go at it like in a very roundabout manual way. Like I had to um, really study it in order for me to like, you know, hold on to it and to put it into like working everyday use. And it's not as simple as just being like, because I was extremely empathetic and calm and patient, very, very, very impatient. Even my first grade teacher was like, yeah, I remember her giving me that compliment, like how very patient of a person I was, but it was also because I knew that I didn't know. So I had to have the facts and to be shown along the way, like watch it in action to be able to use it and to, communicate communications, which is interesting. But um, on a personal topic, like I'm dealing with a little bit of depression this week, and I will, continue to deal with a little bit of, cognitive like spaciness and like, it's no longer I'm more emotionally fatigued. I am still cognitively fatigued, but like I'm trying not to think too much about like, I'm very much a person that doesn't want to sit down and wish and hope for things, like, um, so, but like, um, I do have a bunch to be depressed about, and, so I have to move quick, when those arrows get shot at me. My life depends on it, and I'm talking about just when like thoughts or actions that are empathetic like pop up in my life, I'm like, ugh, like I don't want to even talk about it, like I don't even want to bring up like, because on the surface level, like I am nothing special, I am just another person, you don't do that to anyone. Like, you don't like do the best you can, like that's a moral, so that's a pretty important thing, like in any kind of like in social. And I've always spent time cultivating relationships with people who also feel that way, who feel and think that way and live their lives to where they want to be compassionate people, and they want to do compassionate work, and so like, as a person who is really sensitive to someone who is a natural victim, I have a different, I have very valuable feedback on the subject, and at this time in my life, I have a good working knowledge of, I always have, but I can communicate it now, because like I said, not only do I have those issues myself, but I also, have a sister that, you know, is unable to communicate and do for herself. So, like, it's a lifelong thing that I can see 360 when it comes to empathy. And, like, yeah. So, I need to go, I need to find something to do, something that is kind of constructive to do, and I would like to find some people to like, who understand what it is that I just said. Like, that would be great. Trying not to be neither here nor there on like on my feelings for that, but like, I hope everybody's doing good today. Like, I have a lot of love. Talk soon.